Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 39th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'd like to try to look at the big picture again and cosmic evolution. Um, I'm always trying to sort of illustrate or represent what these experiences as part of the source and how it works in more and more intuitive ways to help people understand. So hopefully, um, the explanation that I'll give here will make some sense. And before I start, I just wanted to mention that as very often, when I ask myself questions or I there's some things that are still not clear. I don't necessarily always receive, of course, the answers as my own ideas, but sometimes I just discover someone or somebody points to a material that I haven't looked at before, either in a comment in a YouTube video or a comment on one of my articles, and that was the case this time. And I've I've come across this guy who's called Matias de Stefano, um, who is a Spanish. I think he's from Argentina. I'm not really sure. And his material is absolutely amazing. So I really recommend that you look at it. For instance, here, this video, The Spirit's Purpose on Earth, from this channel right here. I mean, if you just put The Spirit's Purpose on Earth, Matias de Stefano, you'll find it. And I really, really encourage you to watch this video because it's really nice to see how he structures sort of reality and especially the spiritual part of it. Because I kind of had to discover all of this more intuitively because I had no connection and just trying to rebuild things from scratch. But he apparently has connections with his past, future lives, and has memories from those lives, so he can benefit from all of those explanations. And I really like his work because he's also very humble about it, and says that ultimately what he's saying is not the truth but a perspective on the truth. Like, the truth is this sphere that you cannot see fully, but you can have one perspective on it. And I really like that kind of, it's really a healthy kind of approach. um, and so it's I invite you to look at his material. I'm sure you'll find it interesting. He also does Q&As in English every Friday, and the answers he gives are always resonating with me really, really strongly. So I think he's a very trustworthy source of information. So the reason I wanted to come in here is because he has a point of view which I would call from infinity to zero. So he structures things based on the internal consciousness that splits into several pieces. Whereas I think, take more of the approach of how you build things from void on and going towards infinity. So it's very complementary in a way. And like I say often in my videos, both approaches are valid and valuable because ultimately it's the same thing, because void and infinity are one and the same. They appear simultaneously, and so it doesn't really matter which way you sort of look at things, whether it's from the future, the creating the past, or the past going towards the future. Ultimately, it's all the same. But here, I'd like to offer a nice little explanation that I found, and a metaphor for how things work. So just imagine here for a second that you have this void, and you drop a rock on into that void, and that rock then does these ripples that spread out and larger. And just imagine that any point on that circle, and that's completely arbitrary, any point on that circle, let me deactivate any point on that circle can be deemed as let's say that you just take any arbitrary point, like everything coexists in one point, and then it sort of spreads. And you can draw a line which is completely arbitrary and decide that you read it from this is infinity. This is like the end of the timeline, and this is zero or void. So you start from nothing, and then you go like this towards infinity. And it's completely arbitrary, of course, but you can decide to do that as consciousness, like saying that, okay, from this point on, let's say here I don't remember anything, here I remember everything, and I'll just start from here. But you can read it, it can be anywhere. You can be here, it doesn't really matter where you start. But let's just say you start from here. So these ripples get bigger and bigger, and that is what I call this cosmic evolution, where if you want to read it linearly, you could say that this is the past, this is the future, and along this kind of timeline, you can fit a certain number of experiences. Like, for instance, say this one is the timeline of God created the earth, like the biblical one, Bible. And this is like, say, I don't know, 6 or 7 thousand years old. And then there's the rapture, and you go to paradise, the end. And so, but these ripples, they expand all the time. So, like, it expands outwards all the time. And what I had as an intuition is that basically each of these timelines is like a frozen fractal of cause and effect, perfect cause and effect kind of interactions, where time doesn't really exist because the timeline exists instantly. So all of the steps in the timeline is just like a frame in a movie, but this movie is only 6,000 years long, let's say, but it all exists instantly. And what I saw, and that was also thanks to the work of Matthias de Stefano, is that what consciousness does in order to experience anything, because here it's like you're falling through time instantly and all of it exists, and there is no real evolution along any of these ripples because they're fixed. What happens is you do this, and you spiral out of it. And so ultimately what happens is that you cross those timelines at certain points, you hit those timelines, and so they are part of your quote unquote past, what you think your past is. But as you evolve, when you take the view of what is your past from your now moment along this spiral, then if you're here, for instance, say this is here, it's Newtonian science, then this is your new timeline. This is your new timeline right here. But again, it goes from 0 to infinity, and it has a certain length, and it already happened. It's already instantaneously comes into existence. And as consciousness, what you can do is kind of, what I had as a vision is the idea of surfing. Now, I think I can't remember who it was, but somebody left me a comment on one of my videos with an interview between Eric Weinstein and this surfer, and I just didn't know what was so interesting about surfing. I'm not too much into surfing, even though I've watched a few videos and it's really impressive. But I just didn't think it had any specific or particular meaning. And then I realized now that I'm doing this video that it was precisely so that I would come up with this metaphor. This blue line, if you see it as a ripple going outwards, then consciousness can start anywhere, like here, and then surf the wave as it grows outwards, surf that wave of consciousness, of like God, let's say this is God, surf that wave to give itself the illusion that it's actually making a progress or a linear kind of experience when in fact it's just expanding. um, it's expanding all the time, everywhere at the same time. But by surfing it as consciousness, for instance, incarnating, you appear as a baby, for instance, somewhere along this line, and then surfing it and moving forward, then you can give yourself the illusion that there is this kind of advancement, when in fact from this point, um, everything following Newtonian science has already, it already exists. All of the experiences, all the future experiences from that point on already exist as a sort of a frozen fractal, but not being able to be experienced because everything happens at the same time. And so you, as a surfer, you have a vision which is always kind of, changing and very, very peculiar. Because there are two futures and two pasts. One past is the one that your consciousness really experienced, and one is the past of your timeline. And so if here, for instance, this one is the Big Bang one and the current Einstein relativity kind of science, then this would be the Big Bang. And so we are sitting on, we're actually, there's two pasts. There's one past is the frozen fractal or the frozen ripple, the frozen kind of wave that we're surfing, which is anchored here and exists as a frozen fractal that we're surfing at the moment. But there's also the past that we actually experienced, the real one, quote unquote. But in fact, I don't want to make this even more complicated, but don't forget that, of course, there are many spirals going outwards. And so ultimately you experience it all. And it's just a matter of how you organize these kind of things. But there's still like these two pasts that you're attached to. And then there are two futures also. There's one that is sort of a deterministic future, I would say, like this frozen movie of, and perhaps for us, it's all the scary AI taking over the world, or World War III, where we destroy ourselves, and then it's things advance and go back to infinity. But it's not one where we explore more of infinity. It's one where it's already ending. It already came to an end. And then there is one which is this future, and that is the most uncertain one. Because if you zoom into this surfing, as you know, when you surf, you don't go in a straight line. You can, go up and down the wave. You can slow down a bit. You can go faster. It's not a smooth ride, and that's free will, if you want. That's our extent. The extent of our free will is the same free will as a surfer, basically. The surfer can go a little bit forward, a little bit backward. It can go up the wave, down the wave. And so you have our collective consciousness. You could think of it as like this little blob of 7 billion surfers or more. Of course, you have also plants, animals, and all of that. And surfing this wave of cosmic evolution. And some people are a little bit at the back, some people are at the forefront, and basically when you die, it's almost if you a surfer that falls off its surfer's board and then finds itself somewhere, like the wave is gone, and you find yourself in the middle of the ocean, and you suddenly snap out of it. You thought that reality was limited to your little your wave that you were surfing, and that momentum that you were in, which was this illusion of time going forward, when in fact, the reality is that you're just a dot in infinity, and part of the whole, and sort of you kind of snap out of it. You snap out of the movement part and you go back to the spirit part, which is actually the whole thing. And so what's also really interesting is what's predictable? This is unpredictable. This is why when you have quote certain channelers that say, things are always shifting, and things are always in movement and in flux, and you don't know it. Well, of course, because how are we going to surf this? I mean, who knows? I mean, there is an ultimate evolution, which is all of the future timelines which already exist, which are part of cosmic evolution, which is kind of inevitable. I mean, they cannot not exist. But how are we going to surf them? How fast are we going to hit them? Are we going to slow down or accelerate? I mean, nobody really knows. That's still our free will. And of course, we can all fall off our surfboard, and that would be like experiencing Armageddon. But from the point of view of source, it doesn't matter. It creates these ripples all the time. They're infinite. They're always there. So you can just, oh, we all fall. Humanity, we all fell off our surfboards. Okay, big deal. We just, we catch another wave and then we move on, as spirits. It's like when you're here, basically, when you fall off, when you die, when you fall off your surfing board, then you're like, oh, so which wave should I ride now? And here, when you're on the board and you're surfing along with the humanity, you really take it seriously, like any surfer would. You want to make the best of it. You want to ride it the best you can. But once you fall off and you just fall off your board, you're like, okay, it's all right. I'm gonna catch the next one and try to do better. So it's no big deal once you're out of it, but when you're in it, you're fully focused on what you're doing. So yeah, so thanks again for that surfing interview. I had no idea why I was seeing that, but now I know. Um, so that's the thing. And what many channelers also do is they connect to this frozen fractal one. Of a deterministic future where it's all kind of like cause and effect, like billiard balls, hitting each other and advancing in a very linear way. This spiraling motion outwards is what allows for this kind of quantum uncertainty and experience. Otherwise, I mean, these ripples, since they all exist instantly, it's just like a movie. When you project it, it already exists, and the end exists when the beginning starts. And so it may be fun to watch, but it may not be that much more fun to experience, because what is your free will in there? And so this is how you account for the coexistence between predetermination, where everything exists, because there are these kind of bubbles or ripples that expand logically, where you add more and more layers to a movie, like adding more to the story from the biblical account towards Newtonian science, towards and so forth and so on and so on. And now, if you read some of the Hindu texts, then the universe or God or whatever you want to call it, or experience, is trillions and trillions and trillions of years old, and not just a couple of billion, like we think, like 12 billion or something. And so you always add more and more frames to this, more and more complexity to it. But ultimately, they're frozen fractals of pure cause and effect, like sort of a chain reaction, where there is no need for an experience, actually, because it's all predictable. Um, so that's that. And what's interesting is that also this process of how you surf, in that kind of how you decide to surf here, this cyclical, this spiraling motion outward, is also determined by those channelers that pull information from the deterministic future they think that we will experience, because that gives you, it's like it gives you information on what the wave is doing as a surfer and what you should do. Like, oh, wait, the tunnel is closing, maybe we should accelerate. Or, wait, the wave is slowing down, maybe we should, and so by pulling information from the future and saying, oh my God, there's going to be World War III, or there's going to be this 5G is going to destroy us all, it informs humanity on, the way it should surf the wave in order to avoid it. And so even though you may say, sometimes, you were disappointed in channelers that are pulling these information, and 10 or 20 years after we're saying, well, that didn't happen. Well, I mean, they're pretty crap at channeling. Well, that's not understanding the purpose they fulfill in in bringing that information to our present tense so that we can um, sort of escape it or move past it and not like hit it, as a because if you zoom in here, you could very well have a wave that you would like merge with this timeline down here and then rekindle with the wave up here and like damage your surfboard or having a hard time. And so it's really, really still interesting to have information from these futures that are deterministic, which we are not necessarily likely to experience. But by pooling that information, that actually helps us to steer clear very often of those obstacles because they're now part of our conscious knowing, quote unquote. And so what else? One other thing that I wanted to say is something about instant illumination. So there is this, as I've drawn this line, you could draw an infinite number of lines also that are extremely linear, where you have that evolution here. And the way that I picture it is, you have these kind of movies where things morph one into the other. Like you'd have like a chimp that his face morphs into that of a human, and then the human morphs into that of an alien, and then the alien morphs into a pure white light being, consciousness, whatever. And you have this perfect stillness here, kind of like, I'm really thinking of the Buddha here, which according to the accounts, he just sat down one day after having experienced so many things. He said, I want illumination now, and I'm not going to stop meditating here. I'm not going to stand up from this spot until I achieve illumination. And then suddenly he became enlightened, or after several weeks, I don't really know. But that is what you experience when you have this illumination, is that ultimately there is one sort of line for each of us at every single point where we are already illumination, and where you could imagine yourself as being perfectly still on one of those ripples, and all of your, it was said that the Buddha basically, when he became enlightened, he saw all of his future and all of his past incarnations, but I don't believe he saw them on one of these timelines or one of those. He saw it like this. And so he saw basically himself, I'm having chills now, himself, all of his future evolutions and all of his past sort of shapes or whatever forms that he had. And he saw that all of that was sort of accessible from the now at any point in time from the now, because you are also here, you're also here, you're also here. Every point in the now, that is available to you. And there is one you basically that is still, and that just naturally evolves or morphs into all of its evolutionary stages naturally, just like a plant, kind of like a plant, but not even a plant, because here it's really perfect stillness where everything is just so perfect. And there is no interaction, actually. There is no experience even. Just bliss, just bliss, just pure bliss, um, pure joy or whatever. And all of us basically are on these lines. Each of us has one for themselves, and it's perfect for them. They have access to that perfect version of themselves that already exists on that timeline, an illuminated version of yourself. And I guess the idea, and which you hear from Eckhart Tolle, for instance, is that you should die before you die. It's like you, at every point of the now that you're experiencing while you're surfing that spiral, is that you connect with your illuminated self that already exists on each of those timelines, on each of those moments, to get that kind of blissful feeling that everything is all right and to feel connected, and yet you're still experiencing the now nevertheless. And you're still in the experience. And so it's this combination between, you can reach out to your illuminated self that exists here but that hasn't have had the experience, just the sensation and the knowing of being illuminated, and your experiencing self. And so the combination between the experience and the knowing, or the beingness, is the ultimate kind of merger, or compromise, I guess. Um, now, one other thing I wanted to say is that in Matthias de Stefano, he was showing that basically infinity, or God, expands more along the lines of a tour, where it grows like this and it goes in cycles. You see, you always go it always expands, of course, outwards, but it has the shape of infinity, or of a torus. And that is exact, but I just wanted to flatten it in, like, say, 2 dimensions, so that you see the logic of it. And then when you take a more complex view of it, the tour is only so that you understand the notion of cycles. Oops, cycles. To understand that ultimately, at many points, you are not. It's not like you're repeating history, but you're repeating something that happened, like a season, or this age of darkness, or whatever, just at a higher level. Just like we have these 4 seasons, like winter, spring, summer, fall, and winter. You also experience those as cycles, and here as well. So you could split this in 4 and have cycles. And the reason we have cycles, of course, is just because if everything is a vibration, then obviously you have the up cycle. This would be like spring, everything springs back to life. And then you have summer, whereas like you're enjoying um, the things that spring has created until it lasts. Then fall is where everything is sort of destroyed, I guess. Winter is the depth of destruction, and then you're sort of moving back towards spring, where everything is created again, anew, and nourished, by the way, by what was quote unquote destroyed. And then, of course, if you add the second part of that as a mirror, then you have your infinity loop, which is just this one vibration that is wrapped around itself. To have that kind of experience of growth or expansion via cycles, but ultimately it all expands at the same time, which is why I wanted to show you the representation as ripples that grow, because it's much easier to see circles getting larger and larger than the infinity sign getting larger and larger and expanding simultaneously in all directions. And then to top it off now, just imagine that we are here on our surfboard, and I guess the idea is to view ourselves as a collective surfing that wave. And once we become conscious of that, part of this ascension process, and sort of becoming more aware of reality, how everything works and everything, is that you can hold on to your body, even if you decide as you decide to leave the wave or whatever. And that is something that is awaiting us in the future, but in a very distant future, where we can remain as a collective, and retain our identity, maybe even our bodies, and catch another wave without having to die, basically, because we are so aware of who we are, how we're related to. It's almost like, a baby, if it's born prematurely, it cannot survive just because all of its cells are not aware enough of the links that exist between themselves, and they just cannot retain that collective identity and then just split into separate cells. And so that's the idea of what we're doing now with this ascension process. And I was explaining in the live that actually birth is still very distant. Is that we're just right now learning to consolidate our identity as humans. And once that happens, then once you start becoming aware of that, and you can consolidate your identity and don't have to die in order to resume the experience and incarnate, then you can start to liaise with other consciousnesses, like you become a sort of a neuron that you can then share your surfing kind of techniques for riding infinity, so to speak, with other civilizations. And so imagine that all of this also exists. This is going to be completely messy, but okay, you'll get the picture. Also exists here, and there are other consciousnesses and other beings that are surfing at the same time, also completely different, completely different parallel reality, for instance. And once you sort of snap out of the experience and you understand it from the outside, you sort of become aware of the outside, then you can have a relationship or a connection with those. And I mean, I'm going to stop here, because then what that looks like, as an experience in terms of exploring infinity, is so darn complex that it's pointless to try to even explain it. So I really invite you to look at Matthias Di Stefano. Tell me what you think of his way of structuring things. And I hope this video kind of also helped put it into a newer sort of add some information to it to make it more more understandable or more complete. I don't know what to say. The last thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of this infinitely big puzzle. Where you are a piece, but it's very, I like that metaphor, because it's not that you are a piece that is going to fit in a larger puzzle. You are a piece that is collecting all of the other pieces and assembling the entire puzzle inside of yourself. And everybody's doing the same. Everybody's another piece, a unique piece. And they are assembling also their puzzle, starting from their piece, like their identity, like this is me, Martin, Martin. My name is Martin. And this is, I don't know, let's say Amanda. And she's integrating my piece, I'm integrating hers, and everybody's integrating everybody other's piece. And so you always find a copy of the whole universe inside of everyone. But the idea is the experience of assembling it was so unique. You're assembling the same thing ultimately. You will all arrive at infinity. But the experience of assembling that puzzle and fitting those puzzle pieces inside of yourself was such a unique build that your inspiration and your creativity for creating new universes, for instance, or new experiences or new things, is going to be unique because of the unique experience of how you assembled the same puzzle in a unique way. And that's what makes this really powerful. And that's why infinity uses that strategy of assembling everything is everywhere, because then the experience is what differentiates what would essentially be copies. These experience of assembling everything makes it unique, and therefore can then create another puzzle out of an assembled puzzle, which is even more complex, and so on into infinity. So that's how infinity kind of experiences itself. Is like, let's say, the human experience, the human puzzle can go only so far, and we're like, I don't know where our bubble extends. Let's say we've reached this level, and we still have all of this to explore. And once we reach that, then everyone will have the copy of the entire experience within themselves, and then it will burst again into, you know, I don't know how many pieces, and it will become a puzzle of the puzzle of the puzzle, so on into infinity. And doesn't really make sense to even talk about this because it's impossible to imagine. It's beyond imagination, beyond representation, beyond concept. But our puzzle is a certain size, let's say maximum size, that we can achieve as humans within those bodies, with those limitations that we have, our brain, our mental capabilities, our imagination, our everything. And then once we reach that limit, then it's the moment where basically everyone will contain the information of the whole, just assembled in a unique way and experience. And then that bursts into a further kind of, it goes even further, but the human experience is no more, so to speak. So it's, we transcend the human, and we create a puzzle that is even more complex, that has to be dealt with. I don't know. I mean, for us as humans, probably what we would say is like a quantum computer or something, but that's the only shape that you can give it, or an angel, or I don't know, another higher dimensional being, um, that can then go through the exact same process. So I hope this video was interesting. Leave a comment if you have any questions for the next live. I'm not really sure when I'm going to do it, but I'll keep you posted, and talk to you next time.